The Ferengis represent the ideal of capitalism. Quark says that much to Captain Sisko in a monologue where he drops the mask and almost breaks the fourth wall. The way I see it, humans used to be a lot like the Ferengis. Greedy, acquisitive, interested only in profit. We're a constant reminder of a part of your past you'd like to forget. But you're overlooking something. Humans used to be a lot worse than the Ferengis. Slavery, concentration camps, interstellar wars. We have nothing in our past that approaches that kind of barbarism. You see, we're nothing like you. We're better. So this is in Deep Space Nine. Quark's summation of his species' superiority is an explicit allusion to du commerce, the Enlightenment notion that trade and commerce have the power to soften nations' mores by making people happier through the satisfaction of their needs, whether they be important or superficial. In fact, the theory of du commerce supposes that the manufacturing and consumption of luxuries have a direct beneficial political effect. It suggests that citizens, plied with available pleasures and luxuries, become increasingly less enthused by martial virtues. Du commerce was to realize universal peace through free and open trade, the massive instrument of modern markets, rather than just personal cultivation and education. That ideal was significant in that it articulated the crucial view that economic growth, consumption, and industrial capitalism could indeed serve the human pursuit of happiness. Understanding luxury was a major component in the invention of classical political economy, and I am immensely impressed that Star Trek directly addresses that question through the Ferengis. There is indeed a largely theoretical world in which the consumption of luxury is not, in fact, a detriment to society and contributes to the common good. The political consequences are twofold. A society whose main passion is luxury and consumption is much less likely to be interested in war, and consequently, it is more likely to be interested in the best ways to procure such luxuries, that is, financial wealth. Incidentally, this was the crux of the debate between Hamilton and Jefferson during the American Revolution. Would the United States become a commercial republic, turning towards trade, manufacturing, and the pleasures of urban life, or an agrarian one, modeled on the Roman Republic, with its great patricians and its military leaders, buttressed by legions of rugged soldier farmers and colonists? The ideas of luxury and du commerce were devised as a way to try to understand the new world of economic power and economic competition between nations. It was stunning to most at the time that incredible fortunes could be amassed so quickly by so few people, just by trading and procuring exotic goods for mass consumption, such as cane sugar, coffee, tea, and tobacco. These were goods that urban dwellers relished, and whose consumption had spurred the creation of cafes and restaurants in the great cities of old Europe. It was modern consumption and modern life. All this new stuff ran counter to what most people knew about the world, and most notably the myth that agriculture was the main source of wealth and power. Adam Smith was very much grappling with the same type of future shock that we are experiencing today. These utopian views, defended by the leading philosophers of the Enlightenment, had a much darker side. The pleasures of life, starting with sugar and tobacco, were in fact produced by slaves in faraway colonies. The triangular trade, forced labor, war, and genocide had brought about relative peace and prosperity in Europe and its American settlements. The portrayal of the Ferengis as stalwarts of du commerce conveniently elides that terrible reality. In that sense, this is the exact point where the fictional side of the Ferengis breaks through. While in many ways they represent our point of view, they also stand in for the dreamy ideal of a pure and enlightened capitalism, free of its historical baggage and its actual culpability. That too is us, 21st century humans. So I'm going to read a little more. The main story of Deep Space Nine is the war between the Federation and a ruthless and calculating enemy, the Dominion. Like the Borg, the Dominion is an imperialist power. It seeks to bring people and planets under its rule by any means necessary. The war unfolds over several seasons with its lots of tragedies and revelations. Under strain, Starfleet officers must make difficult choices and ethically dubious compromises. The climactic episode of the series is a study in the impossible choices of war. Along with Chain of Command, Chain of Command, it is perhaps the greatest Star Trek episode ever produced. Captain Sisko must abandon all the ideals, large and small, he is sworn to uphold as a proud officer, so as to lure the shifty Romulans into joining the Federation's side against the Dominion. You have to be immersed in the show and attuned to Trek lore to fully appreciate the enormity of Pale Moonlight. Sisko, as a prominent Romulan politician, killed, and his murder disguised as a Dominion assassination plot. Worse still, it is Garak, the Cardassian tailor, traitor, and spook, who orchestrates the whole affair. Sisko outsources his immorality to his less scrupulous and shady ally. That awful trade-off of the death of an innocent man against the eventual victory of the Federation is absolutely devastating. Avery Brooks as Sisko and Andrew Robinson as Garak, and of Dirty Harry fame, give their finest performances in the service of no less a masterful script by Peter Allen Fields and Michael Taylor. In The Pale Moonlight is Deep Space Nine at its most dramatic and exciting. In one of the episode's many twists, Sisko must bribe Quark to buy his silence. He does it under duress, yet another indignity in the name of a much higher purpose. Quark can barely contain his glee, not so much for the meager profit, but because he finally succeeding in forcing a Starfleet officer, and the captain no less, to show a bit of his inner Ferengi. That little victory in the grand clash of civilizations between the Federation and the Ferengis proves to be Pyrrhic. That is what makes it so poignant. Bribe notwithstanding, the Ferengis eventually lose out. Throughout Deep Space Nine, the scheming and conniving, profit-driven trolls are a constant challenge to the Federation's absolute mandate of cultural tolerance. Early on in the series, it is revealed that Quark is actively discouraging his nephew Nog from attending the station's human-run school. Quark strongly believes that school is not only a waste of time, but also in contravention to Ferengi's customs. The only school a young Ferengi boy should attend is the School of Hard Knocks. Yet Nog aspires to more. Sisko's son, Jake, eventually finds a solution to Nog's dilemma, but it hardly settles the larger issue. Nog is just one single Ferengi child, and both the Federation's policy of absolute non-interference and the Ferengi's bigoted traditions remain in full force. The penultimate episode of Deep Space Nine brings the Great War to a close. The defeated Dominion's representatives sign a peace treaty while the various characters, from Worf to Chief O'Brien and Odo, part ways. As everyone is busy celebrating and saying their goodbyes, Gwen Negazek, leader of the Ferengi Alliance, visits the station to announce his successor. Quark is convinced that he is the nominee. However, he grows concerned when he learns of the new laws enacted by the departing potentate. Ferengi women are now allowed to wear clothes and to join the workforce to participate in business ventures. Labor reforms and pension laws have been enacted, and an elected Congress of Economic Advisors is empowered to legislate. Even more troubling to Quark, the Ferengi state raises taxes to fund various programs and a social safety net. Things are definitely not what they used to be. Against all odds, the Ferengis have mellowed. They have become enlightened social democrats. And I'll keep it at that. So I'm very lucky because my friend Chris Black is here, and he used to work on Star Trek. And so if you want to join us and give us a few, and I must say that, so we're
hello. Okay.
Yeah. So we're neighbors, and this book mostly came out of discussions we had together around beers.
Well, why don't you start with that? I did work on Star Trek. I worked on Star Trek Enterprise, which was the last of the Star Trek series before they're rebooting it. Now they have a new one in the works, and I worked on it for 3 seasons. And Manu had moved onto my street, and we ran into each other. And he was very excited to find out that I had this connection with the Star Trek universe.
It was very funny because he was like, "Oh no, you're one of these."
Yeah, exactly. It's funny because when people find out I work on Star Trek, their first question or the first thing they say usually is, "Oh, I love Patrick Stewart," and I'm like, "Yeah, I love him too. I didn't work on that one." And I was pleased that he actually not only knew the show that I worked on, but liked the show and actually knew which episodes I wrote, which was a little troubling since he lived 2 houses away from me. But it all worked out okay. But so that's how we met, and that's what a little bit of what my background is. But so what? Other than you and I just chit-chatting about Star Trek, why the economics of Star Trek?
So, for fans of the show, you'll know that everything's been written about Star Trek. Everything, like the physics, the philosophy. The philosophy of Star Trek book is called The Wrath of Kant. So everything's been written.
They all seem to have names that are a little punny. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. It's part of the genre. But weirdly enough, the economics had not been done, and it seemed to be the most important part of the show, at least to me, and the most interesting part. Because, there's only so much you can say about philosophy. And physics, I don't know if you guys read The Physics of Star Trek by Lawrence Krauss, but basically he says, no. It's a bunch of check marks explaining why it's no. So the economics is somewhat different. The economics is actually not necessarily a full no. It's not a full yes either, but it's not. So that's why I did it, because it seemed to me to be the most interesting part of the show.
Well, it certainly was. I mean, as you say, everything else had been covered to some degree, or most things had. The obvious things like the physics, like can you build a transporter? No, you can't.
No, you can't.
Stuff like that. But I assume you were drawn to economics. It wasn't just that it was the only thing that hadn't been done. I mean,
no. But
did you have a background?
Yeah,
in economics?
I studied economic history, so I'm an economics nerd, and so I was really surprised actually. At the response, we ended up with Chris last October doing a panel in New York at Comic-Con with Paul Krugman and Brad DeLong, and these are they're serious economists. I mean, they're practicing economists, and they're absolute sci-fi fans and Star Trek fans. Although Krugman was very he was very intent on letting us know that he was really a fan of Asimov, not Star Trek. But I don't know if you remember that. But it's like, I'm an Isaac Asimov fan.
Well, that was funny because Manu asked me if I would be on his Comic-Con panel, and I was like, sure, I'm not an economist. I don't know anything about economics. And he's like, oh, don't worry about that. It's like you can be the voice of Star Trek. So I that's literally all I was. It was like I was far and away the least smart person on that panel. It was like there was me, there was the Star Trek writer at one end, and the Nobel Prize winning economist at the other end. And they would be having these conversations about economic theory and stuff like that. And they would look at me and be like, so when you were working on the show, were you thinking about any of that? And I was like, no.
Well, I mean, I don't believe that. That's okay. Maybe on Enterprise, but
not consciously thinking about it. It was like,
but it's part of the Bible, and it's part of the structure of the show that there's no money.
Yes.
And from what I understand, it's a pain in the ass because the normal conflicts that you will have as a writer with your characters is just not there because they don't. So it's a workplace. I write that in the book. It's a workplace show, but without a workplace drama without drama. So
a workplace drama without conflict. It was like nowhere where no one fights over the coffee machine or whatever. It was like, it was like, and that was one of the challenges of Enterprise was it being at the end of the run, and so much weight had been attached to what Star Trek meant that the mythos, if you will, of Roddenberry's universe, I think had taken on a weight and a significance beyond what even Roddenberry had intended it to. So we were sort of burdened with protecting this legacy that I think exceeded what it was originally intended to be. And we would pitch stories to our boss on the show, and, about conflict on the ship, and he would be like, well, they're Starfleet officers. They don't get into conflicts.
Yeah,
they all get along. And I was like, did you watch the original series? It's like, McCoy and Spock went at it tooth and nail. It was like it was crazy. And it was like, no, this is not the world they live in. This is the enlightened 24th century or 23rd century.
Or 22nd.
Or, whichever one it was. See, he knows more about it. I worked on the show. He knows more about it than I do. And so the threat would always have to come from outside the ship. The threat would always have to come from some aliens with little, we used to joke about it was the forehead of the week, whatever.
But it seems also that the utopian nature of the show. That's one of the reasons I really wrote the book. It's like I can't think in science fiction. The science fiction, whatever we call the science fiction canon, or even in science fiction on TV, there's very little of that utopian strain and optimism that is Roddenberry's legacy, and he sort of bought into it, probably.
I think it certainly was legitimate. It certainly was the vision he wanted to present. It was the show he wanted to make. But then I think eventually, he bought into his own.
And you notice, by the way, that the movies are totally different, and he had no hand in them, and he was forbidden from influencing scripts or anything like that.
Really, so before my time. But.
So the story of the number 6, the undiscovered country, so 91. So it's Nicholas Meyer as well. And there are some racist talk among Federation officers about the Klingons. And Roddenberry was really apparently pissed off at this, and Nicholas Meyer in his memoirs remembers very tense meetings. But the thing is, Roddenberry did not have any say in the movies, and so the movies are very different. I think the Next Generation is really where he sort of got to do exactly what he wanted,
right?
Which was much less gunfights and Kirk being a manly man, and
getting
much more
shirt ripped. Conveniently.
There's. I don't know if you remember that one. What Are Little Girls Made Of?
Sure.
It's crazy.
A lot of them are crazy.
They're just the original series. They're just crazy, and then they're groovy, and it's a miracle that they let them put that on TV.
It was 1967 through 69 or whenever it was. It was a trippy time, right?
Yeah.
So I'm told.
But it was network TV, and children were watching this. So.
Yeah, it's true. But it was it's funny you talk about how trippy they were, and some of those. My friend David Goodman, who I worked with on Enterprise, who's a really talented writer. He's worked on Family Guy and a bunch of other stuff. It's very funny. But he wrote an episode of Futurama that was the Star Trek episode, and they got all of the surviving original cast members to come and do the voices. It's very funny if you haven't seen it.
Is it the episode where Leonard Nimoy is?
They're all heads in a jar, and they end up going. And there's like an energy being that gives them their bodies back, and then makes them perform his original fan fiction episode of Star Trek for him. But there's a bit in the show when Fry is trying to explain to his friends from the future what Star Trek is, because they don't know it. And he's going, science fiction show ran in the late 60s on NBC. So how many episodes are there? 79 episodes, about 30 good ones. And it's and it gets a big laugh, but it's that's about right.
And by the way, there is a real difference between the original series and Next Generation and whatever came next. Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise. And the original series is not at all, or much less interested in economic matters. Whereas Next Generation, if you remember, at the end of the first season, the last episode, the neutral zone, it's where Picard gives this. Jean-Luc Picard, Patrick Stewart. I was going to say Jean-Luc Stewart, but it's where Picard gives this talk about how we're no longer interested in the accumulation of things, and it does it with this inimitable voice, and it's very convincing. And this is something that is very explicit in Next Generation. It's where the replicator appears. It wasn't there before. It's very explicit that this is a utopian post-scarcity economic setup that has nothing to do with the way you live. Now, and we have a hard time remembering this, but because we were young then. But this was during the Reagan years. The Next Generation first run was the same year as Wall Street, the movie.
Oh, really?
And and the crash and all that. I mean, I checked. Wall Street came out in December of '87, and the last episode was March of '88 for the first.
So you had these conflicting messages. You had greed is good,
yes,
and at the same time, we are no longer concerned with the accumulation of wealth.
And this is the same year. This is during Reagan's. The '80s were not. I don't know if you remember, but the '80s were not necessarily a lot of fun.
I don't know. I had a lot of fun in the '80s. But
me too. But
I was in college, so it was like.
But politically, it wasn't. It wasn't all. It's very strange that Star Trek got made, Next Generation got made, and got made, and was able to say these things.
Well, let's talk. Actually, for a second, you bring up an interesting point, because I think it's easy for Captain Picard to say something like that. I think it's easy for him to say, as a philosophy, as a mission statement of Star Trek, that this is who we are, this is who we've evolved into, that we don't have a society based on the accumulation of things. People are no longer concerned with the accumulation of things. And there clearly was a transition, because if you look in the original series, they did have money, they bought things, they talked about having
tribbles,
credits, and that you assume that they got a salary for working on the ship because they had money to spend in trading posts and bars and stuff like that. And there clearly was a sense that they did like to acquire things. There were people, they wanted things, they bought things. So there was some transition that clearly
it's 100 years apart.
It's 100 years apart, but it seems like 100 years is a relatively short amount of time for a people to say, okay, that stuff's not important to us anymore. I don't want tribbles anymore. I just want to be a good Starfleet officer. I want to be a good scientist. I want to be a good captain. I mean,
I want to be a Vulcan.
I want to be a Vulcan, whatever. I mean, when you were writing, do you personally feel that is a philosophy that people could ever embrace? Even in a world where, as Picard says, it's based upon achievement or accomplishment, that people wouldn't like to have nice things, to be surrounded by nice things, to acquire things.
It all hinges on what you define by nice thing. If you can have it replicated at any moment or at any time, the nice things in
I mean, I guess would avarice be eliminated? So it's like if I had a replicator, I mean, crap would be pouring out of that thing day and night. It's
and it wouldn't have any value. It's the phenomenon of in economics. It's called satiation. So it's the notion that the first cookie is always going to be better than the 10th cookie, and
because you become sated with it at some point.
Yes, and so. With a replicator, the 1000th cookie is really not going to be that interesting.
Right.
And so the general idea is that you have the decreasing value or decreasing utility of your enjoyment the more you have things. And in the case of the Next Generation, and the way he set it up is you have replicators, and things that the replicators can make basically have no monetary value because anybody can have it. So there's no point, for instance, in trying to corner the market on any kind of good, since it can be made anywhere by the machine. So the attitudes and behaviors that are conditioned by scarcity today, acquisitiveness, competitiveness, things like that, have to be rerouted, so to speak, to other domains. That's where I find Next Generation and Deep Space Nine extremely consistent with economic theory. Competition and, competition and acquisitiveness and the accumulation of things. It's no longer the accumulation of things, it's the accumulation of reputation and cred and fame. There's only one captain's chair.
Right. And that's a good point, though. So you presume you have a federation that has billions of inhabitants, and not everyone can be a Starfleet captain. Not everyone can be a Starfleet officer.
It's very hard.
That there presumably is a.
They're the cream of the crop of the. They're the 1%.
Yeah. Well, and from a dramatic point of view, that's the story you want to tell. I mean,
Yes.
It's like if you're going to make a TV show, those are the people you want to follow. Those are the interesting characters who get into interesting dramatic situations. But in your world, in your economic world your larger economic world of Star Trek, what about the people who build and service the replicators? I mean, do they live the same life of sort of achievement and reward that a Starfleet officer does?
You can be, probably. I mean, not as worthy of a TV show, I guess. But we do get glimpses of everyday life in the Federation in several episodes. One of them was this episode with Captain Picard coming back to see his family in France, and they're not peasants, obviously, but they're vintners. And they don't do much else but tending to their vines and making wine and being very attached to their craft and their tradition. And it seems that was a way to encapsulate the kind of life that people live when they're not crazy Starfleet officers going to discover new life and new civilization, and they just carry on with their lives. Doing things that are very valuable to them and in which they take extreme pride. And it seems that this is the kind of model. Like the people you don't usually see in Star Trek, they take pride in their craft and in their art and in their everyday life and in the things they do and in sharing them. I'm thinking also of Captain Sisko's restaurant, Captain Sisko's father's restaurant, for those who watch Deep Space Nine. It's the same thing. I mean, it's the reward doesn't seem to be in becoming rich because there's no real money, but it's in becoming very well known for the quality of your work or the quality of the stuff you make. And the people who serve the replicators, it seems that, or service the replicators, it seems that a lot of them are some variant of the medical, of the emergency medical hologram. It seems that a lot of it has been automated. The idea of the replicator is, in the end, a metaphor more than anything else. It's not about the physics. It's about what it represents.
Well, but that's interesting. You bring up the point of automation. And in Voyager, they had the doctor had essentially been replaced by a computer program.
Yes.
And that...
He's very good.
And it's funny. He is very good.
He's a very good doctor.
Well, and the funny thing is it seems like that, of all the things you could replace, of all the things you could potentially automate, it seems like being a physician would be something that someone would actually aspire to be and take. Yes. It's not a job that I would put first in the list to be automated out of existence. But
actually, don't be so sure. IBM is now running this test at I think they have Cedars-Sinai here and Sloan Kettering in New York, and they have this the same machine that won Jeopardy is now doing
the Deep Blue computer.
Yeah, no, I mean, but it's very serious. It's an expert system that apparently gives better diagnosis to cancer patients than doctors themselves and better course of treatment. And so they're generalizing now this trial beyond these two hospitals. So very soon we will have, it's already a reality. We have expert systems that can diagnose and that do it without the biases that come with being a human. So we have that, and then on the other hand, we do have robot surgery systems that now are manipulated by humans, but with enough data, will certainly be able to perform surgeries without human intervention. So even these great, hallowed high human capital professions are probably on their way, not their way out, but they will have a lot more assistance from automatons. And so this is not something that's complete. That's why Star Trek is so fascinating, I think, when you look at it from the prism of economics, because it actually raises the right questions. I don't know if it has all the answers, but it does raise the question of what do we become as a species, but also as a society when machines are much more widespread and much more useful, and what is our place in that? And by the way, you remember that there's this final thing, but the self-aware machines in Star Trek, so I'm thinking Commander Data, but also the Doctor, they gain citizenship. So that's interesting.
Well, what about Nomad, though? I mean, it's like...
Well, okay. That was a curveball.
I threw you one. Good.
No, I mean, I don't have a good answer to that one.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll put a pin in that. Well, dude, I think we should open it up to questions. If anybody actually has a question in the back.
Craig.
I was just thinking about things. Also, I just want to mention the holodeck, which is...
Well, yeah, I mean, that's, yes.
But my thought is, though, like the World War III, like nuclear holocaust, right, that the original Star Trek referenced a lot. Like, it took the Holocaust to somehow create the future where we're all...
I thought it was the Vulcans.
Well, no, that was because I think what you're talking about is from the original series when they talk a lot about the atomic wars and how we manage.
But they keep it then, like in First Contact, it's like post-Holocaust.
Right, exactly.
Like these mountaineers built the warp core out of that. I don't.
But that was all added after. It's like,
Not much ever in the your room made me think about Reagan years and
yeah, well,
the Next Generation. Did they ever talk about the atomic wars?
They don't really, right?
Well, it's weird because it feels like it just becomes a function of the time in which it's built. Like, if you look at the Terminator universe, Skynet has already taken over. It happened like 15 years ago or whatever, right? Yeah, exactly. 20 years ago. So the show, just when you're writing and producing the show, it catches up with the canon in the show.
Yeah,
so
I think the First Contact is supposed to be 2075 or something.
Right, exactly. So you either...
So
you go, do we just ignore it? Do we create an alternate timeline, which is what they did in the first, the J.J. Abrams movie? Do you try to sort of retroactively adjust it to fit current events? It's like I wish I could say it was more... sort of based in sort of a thoughtful, philosophical discussion of how the canon should be expanded. A lot of times it's a much more kind of practical of like, this doesn't work. It's like, what
do we do now?
Yeah, what do we do now? It's now 2001, and this supposedly in the Star Trek universe happened in 1985.
Well, at least it's not like... I don't know if you guys remember that British show that happens on the moon.
Is it Space 1999?
Yes, yeah. At least it's not that.
It's right in the title. It's like you sort of can't get around.
I don't know. I heard that they were going to reboot it, so that's going to be interesting.
It'll all be like bell-bound pants on the moon and stuff.
Yeah, no, it was. So yeah. I mean, the nuclear war. What you're pointing at here is this notion that.
Well, just in economics, that was a cool.
Yes.
Concept of the old 60s Star Trek was like the whole world had to be.
Yes.
Before it could be rebuilt in this enlightened way,
It doesn't seem that this is... Next Generation was not too much into that. Well, the eugenics war or something, there was something about eugenics.
Oh, there was also,
right?
The eugenics wars, that's right. Well, that was where Khan came from, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
There were all kinds of crazy
Khan!
Wars. Yeah.
But...
the genetic Superman.
But like the genetic Superman is actually something also that we're racing towards right now. I mean, if you keep up with where the technology is going, the ability to edit genes and that these edits will be passed on, has been patented 2 years ago. It's called CRISPR. It's a process that occurs naturally in bacteria. It's not bacteria, but somehow they managed to figure it out and to find a way to add genes or snip genes from embryos. So I think there was a Chinese guy who did that as a proof of concept last year. He did it on 70 human embryos. Half of them were not able to reproduce beyond an X amount of, and the other ones that did, he killed them. But, I mean, he killed them. He stopped the experiment. But
Before they could turn into con.
Yes, but I mean, this is the ability to select traits and to insert them and to have them passed on from one generation to the next is probably happening in the next 20 years. That's at least what I've heard from a friend of mine. They had this big confab at Harvard with all these geneticists that was private, that was not public, not open to the public or journalists or anything, which was like, where are we going and what are we going to do? And let's not leave it public so that, you know. But my brother-in-law was part of that thing, and he hinted that yes, what can be done is terrifying, but also very exciting because, you know, that's what technologists, like, they get very excited about terrifying things.
Well, it's funny because it is so much is done just in service of storytelling. It's like you sit in the writer's room, and we just this is my friend Andre Bormanis, who I worked with on Enterprise, and who has a long association with Star Trek. Is an astrophysicist by training, and was the science advisor on the show for many years, and worked on Next Generation and Voyager. And
you invented the biomimetic gel.
It's my claim to fame.
Well, the funny thing was whenever we would have technical questions, we would go to Andre and say, "Hey, could this happen?" And his stock response was always, "Could it happen? It's a big universe. Sure, it could happen. Is it likely that it's going to happen? No, but it's like could was always good enough for us. It's like, yeah, it could happen, so let's do that." Yeah.
I just have a question for Chris. I'm wondering, as a writer for that show, did you have to be a Trekkie to become a writer on that show, or were you a Trekkie, or?
Well, first of all, I believe the preferred term is Trekker. Okay.
No, I mean, it's not a joke. Trekkie was the derogatory term coined by Roddenberry and his pals because he thought the fans were like groupies and they could have a good time with them. So it's actually sexist and not cool at all. Sorry. No. I mean, it's true. It's like there's a Professor Henry Jenkins from USC wrote a whole book about this and how fandom originally, it's called Textual Poachers, and how fandom originally was, most of Star Trek fandom was women and gay, basically. And it sort of turned into something else later. But
okay,
now
new to me.
Now we have the bros on Twitter. But
well, to answer your question, I don't think so. I mean, obviously, a lot of the people on the staff were, they were enthusiastic about working on the show because they did have great affection for it and they did have a history with it. I had been a fan of the original series because it was sort of what I grew up with when I was a kid. I think it was actually already in syndication probably by the time I started watching it. Unlike Manu, who knows them all intimately, I really sort of fell out of Star Trek after Next Generation and was not a really sort of dedicated fan of of Voyager and Deep Space Nine, although a lot of people tell me that Deep Space Nine is the best written of the series. But it certainly helped to have enthusiasm and affection for it, but it was writing the same way you would approach any project. It's like, you didn't necessarily have to love it if you knew how to tell a good story in that world. You know, it was like I worked on I have very eclectic credits. I worked, one of the best jobs I ever had was I worked on the show called Ugly Betty, which is about as far from Star Trek as you can get. I had an interview the show. I'd never seen the show. It had been on for 2 seasons. I wasn't particularly a fan of the show, but there was an opportunity there. I took the meeting, and I had a great meeting, and I went back and looked at a bunch of the episodes and thought, wow, these are great characters. It's an interesting world. These scripts seems like they would be challenging and exciting to try and tackle. And I worked there for 2 years, and it wound up being one of the best jobs I ever had. But I didn't approach it as a fan. But I think most of us on Star Trek were, to some degree, fans of the show. I mean, it was a great opportunity to go there. I remember when I first showed up, and it was at Paramount where they had done the original, it had a home at Paramount forever. And they walked us over to those sets, and you walked onto those. It was the people with pointed ears and ray guns, phasers, and running around, and you could go onto the bridge and sit in the captain's chair. It was like, it was amazing. It was like your inner fan could not help but be excited about it. And they built those sets. I mean, the expectation was that those shows were going to run for like 7 seasons. So they built them. They weren't, cardboard and paper mache. I mean, they were like everything that looked like steel or aluminum was steel and aluminum. I mean, you walked into those things and closed the door, and it felt like you were on a spaceship. It was pretty cool.
That sounds cool.
So, but we're here mainly to talk about Manu's book and about sort of the economic universe of Star Trek.
Yeah, but I think.
I was going to say, anybody else have any other?
But if I may add something,
No. All right, go ahead.
There's something about TV. We were talking about this before, but there's something about TV that's very special. It's an industrial product almost.
It's a business.
Yeah, and there's a lot of craft involved and a chain of production. But at the end of the day, you can tell the kind of stories and in such details and with such depth, precisely because you have like 5 or 6 seasons or 7, and it has to be consistent because you also know that if you're not consistent, the fans are going to be on your behind. And I think that does a lot to actually create an economically consistent world, because it has to be.
Well, and the fans. It's funny you mentioned fans. They do. Star Trek fans are extraordinarily passionate about the show.
Yeah.
And they hold you to a high standard. They feel they have ownership of those characters and those stories to some extent, to a greater degree than the creators and the writers of it do. And if I remember when we were doing Enterprise, you would come in. It aired on Sundays maybe, and we would come in on Monday, and the phone voicemail in the production office would be maxed out with people calling in, sometimes screaming at us, like leaving these distraught messages. Do you remember Vulcans Don't Lie? Someone was like just screaming into the phone, "Vulcans don't lie, Vulcans don't lie." And we were like, well, I mean, that had been established to some degree by some of the Vulcan characters in the show, but you change the world as it fits the story you want to tell. As long as you're faithful to the larger mythology, and you don't do something that's.
I mean, that's one of the greatest things about Enterprise, by the way. It's the way the Vulcans were dealt with, and because they are this stoic. Almost. I mean, in the book I say that the Vulcans, they're sort of the aspirational model for humanity. They're sort of stoic, not interested in anything worldly, but interested in justice. And you see that the Enterprise made that story much more complicated, and that was kind of cool.
Right. Well, and it goes to also what you and I were talking about before was, do you think about those bigger philosophical issues when you're breaking the show? Do you look at the complete canon? Do you look at this is a socio-economic universe whose rules have been established that we need to make sure we're extraordinarily careful about staying within? Not always. I mean, it's in the back of your head. If someone pitches an idea that is so counter to what this world should be, you go, yeah, no, we can't. We can't do that. But at the same time, it doesn't guide the storytelling. What on any given day, what you're thinking in that writer's room is what's a good, exciting, thoughtful, story that we can tell that people are going to watch. It's going to keep the show on the air and keep us all working. And it goes to what you're talking about it being a business. Is it is the balance between art and commerce. Is there's a big studio, there's a big media company that's giving you a lot of money to do something that they expect a return on.
Yes.
And if they don't see a return on it, it goes away. And so you are constantly balanced, between being, and we took that responsibility seriously. I mean, that it was like we weren't
servicing several constituencies.
Yeah, we weren't cavalier about what the company expected from us, but at the same time, you because we were fans of the show, you wanted to be faithful and truthful to what it was, and not get a lot of those screaming phone messages on Monday morning, and the box of garbage that got sent to the writer's office.
But at least there were not like comments on Reddit or.
Fortunately, I guess in retrospect, thank God it was pre.
The golden age.
It was like that we wouldn't get just torched on on Twitter or whatever. It was like we just got voicemails.
It sounds so quaint now. Emails are like.
Probably. we got letters. I mean, we got written letters. I joked. The one thing that I remember specifically was someone sent a box through the mail that came through the Paramount mailroom, just a cardboard box like you would send books in or something, and it addressed to the writers of Enterprise, and it was filled with garbage. Like someone had just taken their kitchen trash can with like coffee grounds and eggshells and stuff, dumped it into a box, and mailed it to us with a note that said, "This is what you've done to Star Trek." And we were like, "Okay."
So the guy had like taken the time to actually do that.
Yeah, took it to the post office, waited, figured out how much the postage was, sent it. That was dead. He was, he had an opinion, and he was going to express it.
It's a real demonstration of how much they care. I mean,
it was a little frightening at times, but it definitely showed the depth of passion and enthusiasm and ownership that people had of that show.
Yeah, I mean, you're sort of stepping into. You're stepping into something that does not necessarily belong to you when you're the writer. It's hard to make it into your own story.
Yeah, well, I think that's really true. I think you understand when you come in that it is a larger thing than you are, and you're being handed, you're being given the car keys, and they're saying, "Okay, don't dent it." And you get to drive it for a while, and then you return it, and then someone else gets to drive it.
And it's and Star Trek in a way. I mean, I'm comparing that because I've had some dealings with the fandom of that other franchise, and
which other franchise would that be?
Yes, Star Trek fans seems to have like a very different view of the world, and a lot of them are in technology, and they're in academia, and I was very surprised how many economists are actual very serious Star Trek fans. But it makes sense because this is the kind of thought experiment that as an academic economist, you find that very entertaining, because here's a society where the incentives are very different, and you can almost. I was almost going to put a model in the book, but then I was told, no, people are just not going to dig this. But I was going to put like a regular. I know a guy who did it. That's why I was saying I know a guy who's a prof, economics prof at University of Nevada, and he worked out like a whole mathematical. There's not, but he basically worked out an economic model for Star Trek.
So you're not the first person to do this, is what you're saying?
Yeah, but like he as a academic, he has to. There are certain things that if he publishes them, he's just not going to be able to survive.
It just isn't taken seriously, you mean, because of the...
Yeah, this is something you do at the end of your career. That's the Star Trek model. Although, I don't know if you guys remember when Star Wars came out, there's this guy who published this paper on Archive about what would be the actual cost of building the Death Star? No, and it was like a very good paper, like published.
I imagine it was fairly expensive.
Yes, and it didn't make much sense as a result. But that guy was not an economist; he was a electrical engineer. So that's okay. If you're an electrical engineer and you do that, that's okay. If you're an economist, if you do that, economists are very strange. They're very much like Starfleet. They really keep tabs on each other, and and everybody knows who's on top of who and what's the pecking order, which is kind of like
well,
academia.
It's like that in much of academia, I imagine.
Yeah, that seems to be, and it seems that the Starfleet or Star Trek, the way it works, it looks a lot like academia in a sense, and with its good sides and bad sides. At least
we
in the
just
way
weren't allowed to show the bad sides. Was then?
No, I mean you're not allowed to show your bad sides in academia. You always have to be very civil in academia.
Right, exactly.
That's something. I did not emphasize that too much in the book, but this is definitely something that makes sense. That the people who are fans of Star Trek are very educated in general, and they find a lot of themselves in it as a result.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think you as
I'm not dissing Star Wars fans, but I'm just.
Well, they're different. I mean, I think they're different things.
Star Wars is more populist.
Well, they grew out of different places.
Yes.
I mean, it was like Star Trek was created in the 1960s by someone who wanted a venue to tell socially relevant stories. Star Wars, and I'm a fan of both, a big fan of both franchises. But it was created as an adventure tale based upon the old serials of the 1930s. I think they were designed to be different things.
A friend of mine has this thesis. He wrote a whole book about this, that it was actually Apocalypse Now, like Star Wars as counterculture of the 70s.
Well, I think it's a test. What you were saying a minute ago, that fans and academics and people in science and technology, take it very seriously and they find it very inspiring. Is evidenced by, how many books, we were talking about this before, that virtually every corner of the Star Trek universe someone's written a book about. The technology of it, the economics of it, the social structure of it. There's I just don't think you see that in the Star Wars universe, that
But one of the reasons that there's much less to work with Star Wars, you have 15 hours of movies. And the animated series don't count. Both for Star Trek and Star Wars, but it's
whoa, wait a second.
I love the animated series.
The Star Trek. I believe the Star Trek Saturday morning animated series, the Filmation series, is considered canon. Is it not?
I think so.
I believe it is.
Sufficiently popular.
I will defer to the writers. But Star Wars, there's much less to work with. You have 15 hours. It's a different. The economy of the movie itself, of the feature-length movie, is such that you don't have time to build the whole universe in such details, and you don't want to. You want to punch people in the gut, and they're going to come out and be very impressed.
It's the difference. You and I were talking about this before as well. It's the difference between television and feature films. Feature films, you tell a story in 2 hours, and television is long form storytelling. And I remember when we were doing Enterprise, one of the challenges of it was there were, I think, something like 700 hours of Star Trek at that point, between all of the series combined. And you would try to pitch a story. You would go...
Done.
Yeah, and it would be it was that was episode 10 of season 3 of Deep Space Nine. They did something kind of like that, and then it would be it happened constantly.
Wow. Yeah, so the official count with the animated series is 726 episodes, not counting the movies.
I defer to...
not counting the movies.
Yeah.
So it's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
A lot more. I don't know how it translates in terms of hours, because also the original series were longer and slower. Like this is 40 minutes versus 50 minutes.
Well, I say an hour. We'll say one episode.
Well, that's a lot. 720. It's more than most narrative fiction. Do you know any kind of book that has a book series that's that is that long? I don't think there is.
Right.
That has 700 plus installments. I can't think of anything that has that depth.
So it was a blessing and a curse in a way. I mean, it was that you had this incredibly rich universe that had been created with all of that web of the social fabric of it and the economic fabric of it and all that stuff that you had these this arena built that you would work in, but then it was also really limiting in terms of you constantly found yourself running headlong into barriers that had been put up by previously established canon. It was what you were talking about before about it's like, well, and the atomic wars happened in 1996 or whatever. It's like, okay, well, how do we deal with that? And it's like,
I was just wondering if after thematically in the 80 years that show felt the need to kind of talk about nuclear holocaust. I don't remember it ever being brought up the way it was.
No, the Next Generation did not. Well, the movies did, right? Did they? I mean,
I did also want to say that I used to always love to look at the artworks in Star Trek, like in these utopian towns they would visit, like Sneaky Daughter or whatever. But there's the artworks always like kind of utopian artworks, kind of fascinating, public sculpture, abstract.
Yes. That's the matte painting department.
Star Trek art history.
Well, I think when you go, I think that's in the original series as well, that you look at the costume design, Bill Tice's costume design, that people were always wearing.
Yeah, I get this book.
Decadent, flowing, that they looked like they were built for luxury.
There's this book that came out like 6 months ago about the costumes of Star Trek. It's an amazing book. It has wow. Yeah, I mean, it's and there's a market difference between the original series and later.
Well, they became more,
utilitarian.
They became more utilitarian. I mean, I think, and Andre was there when they were when they were having some of the early design conversations about Enterprise. It was a deliberate choice to make it look more, with the overalls. I think Herman Zimmerman,
Space shuttle.
Yeah, more like shuttle astronauts. Or in Herman Zimmerman, I think had gone to like a nuclear submarine at one point to kind of look at how it was built. And I remember Archer's.
Oh, so that's why it looked like a submarine.
Yeah, because he had actually,
the noise and the
To make it look like it was a prequel to original series, one of the things you had to do is make it look smaller, more cramped, less luxurious, darker.
Yeah. But the screens were nicer.
Well, the screens were nicer.
Well, because we had actual flat screens that they could put in, and they had a little room on the stage that was just filled with stacks of Mac Mini computers, and each one of them fed a screen on the bridge.
Oh,
and
wow.
so they could
But you could do it from the back.
Yeah, and it was the Okudas in the art department could program whatever they wanted to put up on those screens, as opposed to like Next Generation. They were like those gels that they sort of
and
slid.
They would design them.
Yeah, that were sort of lit from behind.
Wow. Yeah, I mean it's but the utilitarian part I think is important because it also speaks to a certain type of economic universe where it doesn't matter to be sort of very well dressed, and it's more egalitarian, and it's also identifiable. So it's military, but
yeah, it definitely had a more military feel to it. Although I don't know that was the intent.
No, that wasn't the intent. But even Next Generation, it is very utilitarian and military.
Well, there was a lot of we would joke about the bridge of the Next Generation Enterprise with its big carpeted, it looked like a kind of the lobby of a hotel, the luxurious lobby of a Four Seasons hotel or something like that. And I think there was a deliberate effort in Enterprise to have it look much more utilitarian, like a submarine or a modern NASA spacecraft or something like that. I remember Archer's ready room, the ceiling, because it was designed to be as if it were at the edge of the saucer. So the ceiling sloped down, and Scott Bakula was quite tall, and he would walk around in there, and he actually had to duck under the girders that were on the roof of the thing.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah,
Okay.
which gave it I think gave it a sort of immediacy and a reality to it. Like it didn't feel.
There was no 10 forward.
Yeah, it didn't exactly. It didn't feel as much like a sort of a fantastic movie set.
Well, I mean, when you think of Next Generation, the Enterprise is in fact a cruise ship I mean, they have way more civilians than officers, and the only thing we see then is like the occasional moment of tension or problem with some gaseous anomaly, but
some anomaly of some kind.
I'm not dissing, but
an energy being.
They're really like the civilians sort of, sometimes there's a problem and you have to shuffle them around, but they're really not. They're much more numerous, and it seems that whatever is happening upstairs is of absolutely no interest to them.
Well, it was funny because I remember I think it was in first season of Enterprise. There was a teaser, one of the episodes, and I can't remember which one it was, where it didn't take place on the bridge with our principal actors. It was in like the mess hall, and there was a group of crewmen, 3 or 4 crewmen, and they look out the window, out the viewport or whatever, and there's like a planet out there, and they're having this conversation about what do you think's going on? It's like where are we? What is that? What do you think the mission is? What are we going to do? Who's going down? And I always liked that because it was like. Yeah. You saw that there were a couple hundred other people on the ship who were not the senior officers who knew everything. Actually, I always thought we should have done more like that, but
I really liked. You remember Lower Decks?
Yes, Next Gen.
Yeah, it's one of those most beautiful episodes of Next Generation, and it's all from the point of view of the junior officers who are trying to climb up the ranks. And
upstairs, downstairs. Right?
Yeah, and that was, you get a better sense of what life in the Federation is like there, and it's really about
Well, I mean, I think it speaks to your premise of your book, which is it's like here's a group of people who are not doing the job for a paycheck. They're doing the job to succeed at the
they want to get the additional little star
the pips.
There. Yeah,
get another pip on their collar.
Yeah, and be well regarded by Riker or by the first officer. I mean, I always thought, we're getting a little nerdy here, but I always thought that Lower Decks, Picard actually manipulates that young ensign into a suicide mission.
Well, I mean, I think it goes in. It's interesting because she
wants to show that she's a good officer, and he's like, okay, well, go on a suicide mission from which you probably won't come back.
Well, it's funny because I think it goes to what I was asking you before about in your economic universe that the technology exists to create this post-scarcity economy. The technology exists to build replicators where there is no want, there is no need, that anything is provided for. But my question was, is the human temperament up to that? And it's.
You remember what Krugman said?
Well, what you were saying, what you're just pitching right there is an example of human beings in a 24th century technological world acting with 20th century motivations and manipulating other people to get what they want, and it's like in that. I'm sure when that episode was written, it was purely done from an episode of good storytelling. That
good storytelling.
But does it fit into the larger? In 400 years, are people going to behave that way? I don't know.
A sense of sacrifice,
probably.
I would say the sense of sacrifice for higher cause. Right. Is something. I mean, whatever the motivations behind it, a lot of officers in Starfleet are okay to die if it's for the right cause. So this seems very weird. Like I would never.
Well, I mean, I think it's the same mindset is in the a lot of the sort of service, the military and service.
But the thing is,
occupations.
Starfleet
today.
is actually the right cause, or the Federation. There's this normative view of it that I mean. You live in the perfect world, everything's perfect.
But they were, in fact, going about, particularly in the original series, despite the, what do you call it, the Prime Directive, sort of imposing their culture and righteousness upon other civilizations. That there was a lot of speechifying by Captain Kirk about it's like we do it the right way, and we're going to tell you, we're going to show you how.
Well, this was more. Maybe it's the '60s as well. And we're talking about this is during the height of the Vietnam War, so there's something to that. Roddenberry was known to be anti-Vietnam. I came across this petition. So at one of the Science Fiction Congress in '69, like half of the science fiction authors signed a petition to support American involvement in Vietnam, and half signed to, against it.
Right.
So Roddenberry is against it there with Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke and Joe Haldeman and people like that. And of course, on the other side, you have Robert Heinlein and Van Vogt. And
but Roddenberry was also in the military himself. He was in the Air Force.
So he knew what war was about.
Yeah, and probably you would presume had a certain sense of service and service above self or country above self, whatever was motivating him at that time.
Yeah, but it's World War II. That was the right fight, probably.
Yeah, for him.
Yeah, for him. It's messed up. I
think it just goes to say, the point being is you bring, as a writer and a creator, you bring your life experience and your perspective to the stories you want to tell in the world you want to create. And whether, he created this utopian world, or this, what evolved into a utopian world in the later series, based upon his own worldview of what he was seeing in the 60s. And
this is something we could nerd out for several hours on this. Do you remember the Whales movie? So that's the number
Star
4.
Trek 4, yes.
Which is
The Voyage Home. I do know that one. Yes.
It's an amazing feat of storytelling because nothing happens. There's no villain. There are no guns. There's no space battle. There's nothing. The story is not stupid, but they travel back in time. And this is where, you first hear Kirk say that, we don't have money in the 23rd century. And it's more like a joke than anything else, probably. And the whole movie is kind of, it's very breezy and fantastic.
Right. Well, which is weird because that takes place within presumably the same decade as the series does, where they clearly do have money. And
so there's something not entirely canon there.
But it's funny. I think it does go to the more practical matter of just writing something, creating something. Is when they wrote that line, when they broke that story and wrote that script for that movie, were they thinking about what the socio-economic evolution of that
I
universe
wouldn't get
was?
that past Meyer, though, because he was somebody who's past prior work and work when he was there. That's at least the way he presents it in his memoirs.
Right.
So,
but you sort of backfill it. You go, okay, well, now here, this was the story we created for the original series, where, because it's maybe not quite as visionary, it was a little more familiar to people. Oh, we were paid in credits because they sound so futuristic, and we can buy triples with them, and Romulan ale, and whatever. And then you get a decade further down in real time, when they started making the movies, and the world of speculative fiction becomes a little bit more sophisticated.
Yes.
And it's like, well, maybe we should change the rules of this world a little bit, because now the idea of having credits and stuff feels a little quaint.
Okay, I have a comeback to that. TNG.
You don't have to come back to it.
No. The first 2 seasons of Next Generation had been somewhat written in '79, because they were going to do Star Trek 2, and Decker on the motion picture. They changed the name to Riker because they didn't want to pay points to the actor. Okay, so we're getting very deep into fandom here, but so Next Generation, the Bible was like toggled and all that, but it was kind of set in stone by '79 that there wouldn't be any money, and they just pushed it 100 years later. But originally it was Kirk and Spock and everybody who should have been on there, and they had 20 episodes written or something like that. So it's not 2 seasons quite, but
no. I mean, I think the point that I was trying to make is it's less of a sort of thinking about this fictional futuristic the economics of this fictional futuristic world that you're creating, that now you're 10 years later in the writer's room, and you're thinking, well, okay, what feels like a more sort of current version of a science fiction universe? Oh, they shouldn't have money.
Yeah. Well, I always took that line in Star Trek 4 when Kirk says they're still using money to mean cash. To be electronic, like money is...
That's interesting, yeah.
That's interesting.
Well, which is funny because I feel now I go out and I pull actual cash on my wallet and I feel like I'm a dinosaur. Like I'm not. I don't wave my phone over something that I'm like I'm an old man because it's like...
That's how I always took it, because in the original series, there were also...
Credits.
Credits, and Kirk at one point in the Organian peace treaty story, Mercy. Like, do you have any idea how much Starfleet has invested in your training? It's Spock says 1,456. It's like they clearly had some kind of way of keeping track,
right?
Of something, the value of things.
They probably do.
And Scotty, you just earned your pay for the week. There were lines like that, which could have been like a...
And there were mining concerns or mining consortiums and all that stuff.
Well, and the Horta, and you guys are going to be embarrassingly rich. And, and the dilithium miners in the Harry Meadows.
Right.
Yeah.
They clearly were making money doing it.
Yeah, they're prospectors or whatever, yeah.
Clearly getting some kind of financial award, even if a cash currency economy is no longer...
Right, well, which I think really goes to the heart of the conversation, which is
there's a change in between the two.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's and by the way, it's a decision. That's what I got after reading all that stuff and writing, and no, because there's so much that's been written about it. It seems that at some point between Kirk's century and Picard's century, they made the decision to they invented the replicator, for one. There's no replicator even in the movies.
Well, it's funny. I always wondered, when I was a kid, like watching that, and the little they slot the little thing in. It's like I was like, is there a kitchen back there? Is there like is there a little elevator that brings the food, or is that machine making the food? It was like it's what
do they call those things? Not a lazy.
There's like a dumbwaiter that comes from the galley up to the. That's like I was like.
They're making Kirk's chicken sandwich.
But it would make that noise. They'd slot the thing in and it would go. And it's like, is it manufacturing it? I was like, I didn't know.
It looks very much like TV dinners, or if you get a chance, you can see the GE Electric House of the Future, and it's like with Ronald Reagan and Nancy, and they're showing off all these appliances where you push a button and the meal comes out, and that comes out.
But there's like the episode with Captain Christopher where he's being held, or the Air Force guard's being held on the ship, and the guy asks him, he says, "Are you hungry?" And he says, "What do you want?" And he goes, "I don't know, some chicken soup." And so he sticks the thing in, and the door opens, and it's there immediately, steaming hot. So there's no way that could have been made in a galley. They could have received the order sent. So I look at that and I go, that has to be a replicator. That's the only way
like
that
ramen.
bowl of soup could have gotten there.
It's got to be ramen, like you have the...
But no, it wouldn't even have been fast. It was like it's like 2 seconds. It's there.
Yeah, I guess they have to
So you start pulling threads, man, and it's
I know. You will always find the funny part, though, and I think that's what I get from the book, and what I hope to convey is, well, the replicator, for one, the Federation has them, and so do the Ferengis. But the Ferengis, they make you pay for usage of the replicator.
Well, I think what's really interesting about the book you've written and the thought you've put into it and the conversation that it sparks is that when you're working on a television show, and famously Roddenberry invented the transporter because from a practical production point of view, they couldn't have the ship land and take off, so it was like, okay, what's something we do? We'll beam them down. And
same with the communicator.
Yeah, and communicators and universal translators, and so many of those things weren't invented in the show as part of this larger sort of tapestry of the future.
No,
they were invented because for expedience sake, yeah. But then they become so much a part of that universe that it
takes a life of its own. I mean,
it's like it becomes a little what came first. It's like,
you remember those Motorola flip phones, right?
Yes, exactly.
But
Yeah,
the
the
guy who,
StarTAC phones,
the
yeah.
guy who invented the cell phone, so not the radio two-way, but like the notion that you would put cell towers and there would be a mesh and all that. That guy was a fan of Star Trek, and he wanted to have something that worked exactly like the captain. Yeah, exactly.
My dad worked with on
No way.
in 1974.
You're joking.
Dad found an old letter from Marty Cooper to my dad and his team at Motorola Government Electronics Division for collaborating on this project for mobile telephone.
Well, and as you were talking before, I mean, how many NASA engineers and JPL engineers and electronics, electrical engineers and people were
People at
inspired?
Google wanted to do the same as the computer. I mean, like the enterprise computer, next generation enterprise computer.
How many economists were inspired to their field by Star Trek?
Paul Krugman wrote the introduction to the new edition of Foundation. So it's the one in the Great American Library or something like that. It's the one volume thing, and he says basically that. And I strongly put Asimov and Star Trek together because they're really.
Yeah. Well, and but the
intertwined.
Foundation books, which I will confess I've never been able to actually get through all of them, are very rooted in economics. I mean, so much of like commerce and economics is what that story is.
Well, the main character is economics.
He's an economist, yeah.
Krugman, he wrote that he wanted to save the world with mathematics after reading that. So, I mean, okay, it's not Star Trek, but I'm saying it's
Science fiction.
yes, and
Imagining a future world that's different.
that's improved. I think that's the economists, like, they're really into marginal improvements, finding little ways to tweak. So this is something, the notion that we could get to a point where distributional issues are no longer so fundamentally difficult to solve is really what they're interested in. And reduction of poverty, no longer poverty, and everybody's has health care and stuff like that. That's stuff that they're working on right now.
Let me, if I could ask a question now.
Please, Andre.
Apologies for being late. If you've already addressed this, of course, don't worry about it. I read recently that there are various projections that say in the next 25 years, about half of the jobs that people in this country are doing today will either be automated, done by computers, or done by robots.
It's coming.
Displace a lot of people. And who knows how many new jobs will be created in different fields in that time, but
Do you want to hear something even more scary? So this is happening. Like, there's no way we can. And maybe it's not 25 years. Maybe it's 50. But what used to happen, what that means is we're moving towards a world where industry and industrial production, in terms of value, will look much more like agriculture. Agriculture today, we feed on it, but it's 3% of GDP. It used to be 25. The usual way in which a country would rise from poverty was you build factories, people come from the countryside, they get jobs, they get wages, standard of living rise. You've seen that in South Korea, for instance, which went from abject poverty at the end of World War II to what it is today, or China. So that is the preferred path to national wealth and increasing standard of living through industry. What happens when automation arrives, and it's already here, and it's no longer something that's profitable enough to employ people? So what happens to Nigeria will have 1 billion inhabitants in 2100. Tanzania will have 300 million. Malawi, you might have heard of Malawi. It's a tiny country, 200 million. And suddenly, the usual path to national wealth will be closed off because there won't be any point. So it's a rich world problem in terms of distribution. So, we're going to have dislocations and who gets what and which job gets replaced. But we have the advantage of having old institutions and government and the press and all that stuff. So we can actually probably deal with it. It's not going to be fun, but we can deal with it.
One way would be to maybe, instead of the average being 40 hours of work a week, it's 20. Is that a possibility? Or would that lower everybody's standard of living? Or would the pay scale go up since so many things are made with minimal input of labor?
A lot of people are talking about universal basic income as well. We have to figure, reducing the work week, maybe. It's been some countries do it and have but it's basically when France did it, so from 40 hours to 35, it's in fact an accounting trick. It just means that if you work longer than 35 hours, it's counted as overtime. But the overtime rate is not as big as it used to be, so it's largely shuffling around.
But that's largely compensating for sort of the shrinking amount of labor, as opposed to what you're pitching is if you cut the work week in half, you create twice as many jobs. It's like...
That would be, I'm a strong believer, personally, I'm a strong believer in infrastructure, and there are things that, building bridges and roads and all that, well, you can automate some of it, but the people who plan it, there are a lot of jobs that and work that needs to be done, and that could employ a lot of people. So, and probably a good infrastructure is a good idea for.
I think it circles back to something we talked about a while ago about the Star Trek universe, which is in a world where even your physician is a computer program, where so much of that labor force is automated, and you have the characters you see on the show who are largely either Starfleet officers or scientists or people to some degree at the top of their field. There are presumably billions of people in the Federation who, in a world that is evolving towards what our world is evolving towards, which is
they idle?
Yeah, what are they doing? Are they painting? Are they sculpting? Are they?
They probably are. They probably are. But they probably also take care of their kids and teach in schools and build stuff. And a lot of them probably have a shop in their garage, and they're trying out new stuff. That's the.
It's a universe of garage entrepreneurs.
Tinkerers.
Yeah, tinkerers, and a lot of amateur scientists.
Well, Tom Paris liked to work on cars, right? Wasn't that his thing?
Sorry, we could go on like this for hours.
Well, maybe you could. I'm done.
What time is it?
Well, thank you so much. The book is.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, the book is wonderful. Any other questions? Anybody? No. Anyone? It's a wonderful book, and he's a wonderful guy. So,
thank you.
Buy it, read it.
Oh,
He'll sign it for you.
Oh, all right. Let's.
You've been listening to the Skylight Books Author Reading Series. Don't forget that you can listen to this and all of our other great podcasts at skylightbooks.com. Thanks again for stopping by, and we hope to see you soon.